Hello everyone and welcome to episode 41 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing fat loss myths. There really is dozens of fat loss myths, if not even more than that. However, I'm just going to discuss 4 today, and these are 4 really big ones that for whatever reason just keep cropping up, whether that's online, whether that's people asking me questions. So I really do think you're going to find a lot of value in these 4 points, and hopefully it can really help you a lot. So the first point I want to bring up is this myth of, if you're in a fat loss phase, that cardio should be the main tool to get you to your fat loss goals. And this completely misses the bigger picture. So first we need to take a step back and realise what we're actually trying to do during a fat loss phase. So obviously the goal of a fat loss phase is losing body fat. Now, to guarantee that will be the main tissue being lost within a fat loss phase, we need to do something to actually preserve that muscle mass. So otherwise we're going to lose a lot of muscle mass during the fat loss phase, and that's going to result in a decrease in metabolic rate, and it's going to be an inefficient way to get you to your fat loss goals. Now, that being said, that therefore means that weight training needs to be the foundation of your routine within the context of someone trying to achieve their fat loss goals. Now, the reason being, weight training is obviously going to help preserve lean muscle mass during a fat loss phase. So therefore, cardio and decreasing calories are just merely tools to create the energy deficit needed for fat loss. But without that weight training component in place to preserve lean muscle mass, you're just going to lose so much muscle during the fat loss phase. As I said, inefficient ways to lose body fat. You're going to notice big drops in your metabolic rate, and therefore it's going to be very difficult to lose body fat effectively. So that is such a big game changer. If you're not doing that already, this will really change everything. Have a foundation of a routine of 3 or 4 days a week at least weight training, and then you can add cardio on top of that, whether that's doing high intensity interval training at the end of your weight training sessions, or other times of the day, or other days completely. You can use other cardio tools. You don't even need to use cardio at all within certain contexts of the fat loss phase. So initially you might just start with weight training, controlling your nutrition, your calories and macronutrients, and then you're adding cardio and or decreasing calories to create the energy deficit needed for fat loss. But the real take-home message is weight training should be the foundation of your routine, and you're merely adding cardio and decreasing calories subject to when that is necessary. But weight training is always the foundation. So the next point I want to bring up is this clean eating myth, and I discussed this in great detail on episode 1. If you're still yet to listen to that, I suggest you go back and re-listen to that, because this is going to be slightly less detail. So basically, the point that people often make is all you need to do is get lean, is just to eat quote unquote clean. And what they basically mean by this is eliminate processed food, and that's all you need to do to get lean. And this statement just completely ignores context, and it completely ignores the foundation of fat loss, which is a energy deficit needs to be in place for fat loss to take place. Now, my biggest problem with this statement is ultimately you can overconsume any food group and not lose body fat and even gain body fat. So that's the biggest problem with this statement, is it ignores context, it ignores total calories and macronutrients, and it ignores the energy deficit. Now, with that being said, obviously I'm not saying just to eat junk food. I do agree the majority of your food sources need to come from single ingredient whole food sources to help prevent any micronutrient deficiencies, to also keep the diet nice and full of fibre. It's going to keep the diet nice and satiated and help with adherence. But we must put this underneath a hierarchy of total calories and total macronutrient intake. So total calories, protein, carbohydrate and fat intake. So a good example is if we had a diet which was full of quote unquote good food, lots of chicken, lots of fish, lots of good lean proteins, lots of good wholesome carbohydrate sources, lots of good fats, lots of fibrous vegetables. If we were over consuming calories by 2,000 calories, you're going to gain body fat. So that's the point. It's the overconsumption of anything that can either lead to fat gain or negate your fat loss efforts. So as such, focus on eating the majority of your foods from single ingredient whole foods, but it must come within the context of a calorie controlling environment with macronutrients matched up to suit your goals. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, next point I want to address is meal frequency and your metabolic rate. There's a myth that a higher meal frequency results in a increased metabolic rate, and thus this can help with fat loss. Now, it's important to know that there's 4 key factors when determining how many calories an individual will burn each day. Those are your basal metabolic rate, or BMR, thermic effect of food, energy expenditure via structured training and exercise, and also non-exercise activity thermogenesis, also known as NEAT, and this is subconscious movement that is not related to training. So fidgeting, sweating, just keeping you alive, moving around, that non-exercise activity that also burns calories. Now let's firstly look at each one individually and see if we can see whether meal frequency will actually have an impact. Firstly, basal metabolic rate. This is mainly dictated by your fat-free mass. So ultimately, minus body fat, this is everything else. So this is obviously muscle mass, bone, your organs, but mainly your muscle mass is going to dictate the rate of your metabolic rate. As a result, someone with a lot more muscle mass will for the most part have a higher basal metabolism. So there's no way that an increased meal frequency can almost affect this fat-free mass. So this is the first one that we can almost cross off. Now the next point I want to address is the thermic effect of food, which is ultimately dictated by total caloric intake and macronutrient intake. So as such, larger, less frequent meals would have a higher TEF, but this would be less frequent. Conversely, a more frequent meal frequency would result in lower, more frequent TEF. But the point I'm going to make is over the course of the day, the net difference should be the same. So as such, someone consuming 3 large meals compared to 6 meals, but the caloric intake, macronutrient intake the same, the TEF will be the same over the course of the day. So this wouldn't affect it. So as such, meal frequency wouldn't affect BMR or TEF. Now the next point we can look at is structured training calories. Will there be a difference from meal frequency to affect your exercise expenditure via training? Quite clearly, this just isn't the case. It's not. Meal frequency isn't going to affect the amount of calories you burn during the session itself. Final point is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So any fidgeting, any non-unconscious movement, again, this is not going to be affected by meal frequency. So as such, let your preference dictate a meal frequency that you can stick to. Now, with that being said, there's one small caveat I want to make. There's a small amount of acute data that suggests that a too low meal frequency can affect muscle protein synthesis. Now, it's important to know this data is only acute data and doesn't actually look at the long-term changes in lean mass, which I suspect would be pretty minimal, if any at all. And this is within the context of a muscle gaining phase. So within fat loss, let a meal frequency that you prefer and ultimately track calories and macronutrients. So whether you have 2 meals or 10 meals, it really doesn't matter. Whereas within a gaining phase, a muscle gaining phase, it's worth just being a little bit more cautious. And as such, I wouldn't recommend a meal frequency of less than 3 protein doses per day. Now the final point I want to address is sugar. And the myth is sugar will make you fat, and this is just completely wrong. Again, this just ignores context. I know this has been in the media recently, and ultimately a chronic energy, an unused chronic energy surplus will result in fat gain, not sugar acutely, unused caloric surplus. So that therefore means that within a calorie controlled diet, some sugar is not going to cause you any problems whatsoever. But notice the big emphasis is on the calorie controlled environment, not sugar itself. It's important to note an overconsumption of anything can result in fat gain, like when I was discussing the clean eating. So as such, the devil's really in the dosage, not sugar itself. An example: overconsumption of sweet potatoes in an environment where you overconsume total calories, that will make you fat. If you're in an unused surplus over a period of time, that will result in fat gain, regardless of whether that food is sugar or any other. Such a key point I wanted to address. Now, with that being said, sugar is obviously devoid mainly of micronutrients, not completely devoid, but pretty much devoid of micronutrients. Therefore, if you're going to include this in small amounts, the main reason being it's just not satiating, and there's more satiating and more micronutrient dense ways to meet your caloric and macronutrient intake. But a small amount of moderation is absolutely fine within the context of a calorie controlled environment. So that's the key. The calorie controlled environment is really the most important factor. So hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you can start applying this and potentially negating some of your philosophies if you've been following these prior to listening to this podcast. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk, you can download that immediately. In addition to that, listen to all my other previous podcast episodes. Look on my website, I've got over 100 videos, and you can learn more about myself and the services and products I also offer. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.